Richard Rellis here with columnist Bob Robb, and welcome to another episode of Bob Robb Explains Basic Economics to Me. Inflation is a thing. Biden says that his plan will not cause it or is not the cause of it. Others say differently. Bob, what is going on with inflation?
Well, I would love to be able to say that higher government spending is associated with inflation. But that's not really the case. There's all sorts of reasons to worry about what Biden's plan will do to the economy. Sparking inflation isn't one of them. I, in the column, point to the example of the countries in the Eurozone, all of whom uniformly spend significantly more than the United States does on government expenditures as a percentage of GDP. But like the United States until recently, inflation has been dormant there. I think inflation is a serious worry. And we need to be careful in the public discussion of it so we don't start pointing fingers in the wrong direction or using it as a political talking point, rather than focusing on where the real action is, which is the Federal Reserve.
Right. You point out, and I guess we should even get very basic. Inflation is essentially things costing more than they normally would in a marketplace, right?
There are two different kinds of price spikes. When there is for an individual commodity greater demand than there is supply, the price of that item increases.
Toilet paper.
And the supply chain problems that we're having is causing that to occur in a lot of areas. Those things correct themselves over time as price signals cause changes in behavior, either a reduction in demand or an increase in supply. The inflation that is worrisome is chronic and not tied to individual movements within individual items. It is, as Milton Friedman described it, just too much money chasing after too few goods, even when the economy is fully up and operating. And with the massive expansion that's occurred in the money supply by the Fed for more than a decade, and without any real plan as to how the Fed quits doing that, I think after we get through these supply-demand imbalance price spikes, we're likely to have chronic underlying inflation that affects all parts of the economy and is highly destructive, particularly to middle and low-income workers and small savers.
Right. So you're saying that after the ships full of goods get unloaded successfully and factories are up and running, you point out in the column one of the problems is essentially the government buying back its own debt?
Yes. And again, higher debt is not necessarily associated with inflation. The United States, I think to a lot of people's surprise, is one of the biggest borrowers in the world, borrows a far higher percentage of its government spending than the much higher spending European countries. But when the central bank finances that debt by buying it, which the Fed has been doing in record numbers. The Fed owns about a fifth of all publicly owned federal debt. When the central bank finances government debt by, in essence, printing money, that is inflationary. And our Fed has been doing that, as has the central bank in Europe and central banks all over the country, to an unprecedented degree.
So, right, we should, as the column points out, and the column again has, as typical for a Bob Robb column, lots of details and analysis of how we got here. But you say what we should be watching is not necessarily Biden's spending program, but how the Fed operates. What sign should we be looking for?
What it develops, if it develops one, is a plan to unwind this unprecedented monetary stimulus that we've been engaged in for over a decade. We've never had this large of a monetary stimulus. We've never unwound one. So we're in very uncharted and dangerous waters when it comes to monetary policy, and how the Fed gets us out of that, I think is both tricky and hugely important.
And that's back to our next lesson. Thank you for explaining inflation to me. And we'll be back later with monetary policy at the federal level. Good to see you, Bob.
Good to see you.